associated with our region, tonight centring around Sheffield.
Leppard are one of the world's premier rock bands. From their humble Sheffield roots, they've gone on to sell more than 30 million albums worldwide. Yet the band have had their share of tragedies. Drummer Rick Allen lost an arm in a car accident, and in 1991, guitarist Steve Clark died after a drinking session. Just last year, they returned to Sheffield to play to their most loyal fans and have had even more success with their latest album, Adrenalize.
What I think we've achieved with the new album is more of the energy of the Pyromania record with the songwriting capability that we kind of got to almost down to, you know, a fine art on the Hysteria record. Hysteria was a great record for 1987. It was an album that we really had to make to prove a point. We didn't feel the need to prove a point on this one. All we wanted to do was make a good record. So consequently, all we were worried about were writing great songs and getting them across in a more energetic way than we did on the last album. We were really into the production thing and what have you on Hysteria. This time round, we wanted the guitars up a bit louder, the vocals a bit rougher, not so polished. So the energy came across a little bit more. I think the Sheffield scene was a lot more, what's the word, kind of popular in the early 80s than it is now. I don't hear of a great deal of bands coming out of Sheffield right now, but back in like 80, 81, even the late 70s, there was a hell of a lot of bands coming out of Sheffield. Clock BVA, the Stunt Kites. There were just thousands and thousands of bands. It seemed to be. You could never get a gig because they were always booked. I don't think it's as much now, but I guess it's just that industrial thing, you know. Kids don't want to work in factories, so they get a 30-quid guitar and learn to play 3 chords, or as it turned out around about the 80s, they bought a synthesizer and learned how to play 1 note at a time. And you just do what you do. The first gig we ever played was a school just on the outskirts of Sheffield called Westfield School. That was back in July 1978. And a teacher gave us 5 quid out of his pocket. And the second gig we played was in a field in Burngreave, I think it was the area. It's just up from the Wicker in Sheffield. We played in a field and it went dark, so 2 cars parked in front and turned their headlights on. And we got paid £3 for that. And then the next gig we did was actually almost normal. We played the Limit Club, which is now closed down. And we didn't get paid at all because it was a free concert. They let kids in for free, didn't pay the bands, consequently. We got to play in front of a lot of people. We supported the Human League. Yeah, there's a culture clash. It was good though. They were our first 3 gigs, so we'd gone from 5 quid to 3 quid to 0. And as usual, especially with the way Leppard works, we ended up having to pay to play our next gig because, you know, you get paid 15 quid to go and play Monsell Head or something. And it cost us 40 quid to hire a van. Yeah, so we were £25 out of pocket.
The band went through their growing pains in the Crooks area of Sheffield. They're now heroes in the local pub, but it was a far from glamorous beginning.
We pack all the stuff, drag it all down them stairs from that rehearsal room. Go, I don't know, maybe to Manchester or Liverpool in this van. Everybody in the van and a few friends' cars. Do the concert, which quite often was like starting at 11 o'clock at night in universities or whatever. And then packing everything up, driving all the way back to Sheffield, back up the stairs with all the stuff. And, you know, you wouldn't finish, well, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
In the Spoon Factory on Sheldon Road, I think it was called. It's just about 400 yards from Bramall Lane. And it used to cost us 5 quid a week. They'd only disadvantage was that it was up 2 flights of stairs that were incredibly slippy when it was raining or snowing, because we had to lug the gear up and down these stairs all the time. But it was great, £5. It used to cost us each £1, you know, a week, and we just left the gear, locked it up, went down there every night after work or school. Well, actually, Rick, as I said, didn't really go to school much. But it was brilliant because we had it for about a year and a half, and it cost next to nothing to run. We could play as loud as we wanted because it was an old, what they call little mesters, where there's all these individual little workshops that single guys rented out and made their own spoons or knives and forks. And we got this one where a guy just packed it in, and we got it, threw his equipment off the roof and moved ours in. It's great. I tell you, it was one of the best things we ever did. We used to send tapes and requests, and they'd like, well, when you play a gig in London, give us a ring. We couldn't afford to go down there. It wasn't until, for us, that we got round it by releasing a self-financed EP, which we sent copies of to various outlets. Like, we sent one to John Peel. We sent a bunch down to Radio 1. We sent them to all the music papers, NME, Sounds, etc. And we sent them around to all the record companies. And eventually we started getting a bit of press, and it was selling around Sheffield, and word got around, and eventually they just couldn't ignore us anymore. We actually played Retford Porterhouse, which is like a bit of a compromise. We travelled 30 miles south, and they came up 130 miles. And we had about a dozen round to the Retford Porterhouse to see us. Well, there was a time I didn't like much about it. About 10 years ago, I didn't really get on with the place very well, but I think maybe absence makes the heart grow fond of it, and being away from it for so long. And I do think it's actually improved as a place, vastly. It's a really pretty city. I like the people. There's a couple of good pubs there, specifically one called the Yorkshireman, which is a bit of a rocker pub, and you go there for a pint, and they've got a good jukebox. It doesn't have Kylie on it. It has Nazareth and Led Zeppelin on it and things like that, which is much more fun. I don't think it's a coincidence that three of the biggest selling bands around for the last few years has been Def Leppard, Bon Jovi and U2. And U2 are all from Dublin. Bon Jovi are all from New Jersey, and initially Def Leppard were all from Sheffield. I think the fact that you have something in common holds it together when you're not on stage. And I must admit that the latter lineups of Whitesnake must have been a bit tricky off stage when you've got like David, who's English, and then you've got Adrian Vandenberg, who's Dutch, and Tommy Aldrich, who's American, Rudy, who's, I think, Cuban-based. Well, he's American-Cuban, and then Steve Vai coming in. It must have been a bit odd, because they had no, oh, do you remember that thing 10 years ago, sort of thing? Or even if you're a bunch of 21-year-olds, you remember last year when we did blah, blah, blah? It doesn't obviously happen that much if a band doesn't grow together. And I think growing together is, if you do manage to get to a certain level of success, it almost guarantees that you can, if you keep going up in stages and reach the next plateau. Whereas bands that form out of necessity, you know, record companies piecing them together or whatever, it's never going to have the same vibe.